The pursuit of power, effective governance. It's something that fascinates us, isn't it? How do nations rise and rule?
Absolutely. And today we're diving into a text that really gets to the heart of it. Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince. We're using the 1909 English translation by Luigi Ricci.
Yeah, and the prince. It often brings up some pretty strong images, doesn't it? Machiavellian and all that.
It does.
Yeah.
But, it's so important to remember the context here. Machiavelli wasn't just some theoretical supporter of tyrants.
Right.
As Ricci points out, he was deeply invested in seeing Florence well governed. His own views actually got him kicked out of his job in the Republic. He wasn't exactly mainstream for his time.
Okay, so our mission here isn't just a book report. We want to really dig into the core ideas. How is power actually won? And maybe more importantly, how do you hold on to it?
Exactly. Think of this as a quick way to get up to speed on one of the most influential and maybe most misunderstood political books ever written.
So where does he start? What's the basic framework?
Well, he starts by categorizing governments. Pretty straightforwardly, he distinguishes between republics and monarchies.
Okay.
And then with monarchies, he splits them further. Hereditary ones, passed down through families, and new ones.
And these new monarchies sound particularly interesting. How do they come about?
All sorts of ways, apparently. You could have entirely new states, like Sforza grabbing Milan, or you could add territory to an existing kingdom, like Spain taking Naples.
And the how matters too, right? Your own strength, luck.
Precisely. Through your own arms and ability, by sheer fortune, or, helped out by others.
And he flags an issue with these new ones straight away, doesn't he? Instability.
Yes, that's a key point. People hope for better things under a new ruler. That's natural. But that same hope means they get disgruntled fast if things don't improve.
So the thing that helps you gain power can also undermine you quickly.
Exactly. Initial excitement can sour fast. It's a real tightrope walk.
So that's the turbulence of the new. What about the old guard, the hereditary states?
Well, Machiavelli argues they're generally much simpler to maintain. You mostly just need to stick to the old ways, the ancestral customs.
Don't rock the boat too much.
Basically. Adapt a bit when needed, but the fact that your family's been in charge forever gives you a lot of built-in stability. People are used to you.
He uses the Duke of Ferrara as an example, holding off Venice and the Pope, partly just because his family had ruled for so long.
That's the one. Deeply ingrained authority. But then things get trickier with what he calls mixed monarchies.
That's when you add new territory to your existing state.
Right. And here, things like shared language and nationality really matter. He points out how places like Burgundy and Brittany integrated into France more easily because, well, they were culturally similar already.
But if you conquer a place with totally different customs, language, laws, that's the tough part.
That's where the real challenges lie. How do you hold on to that?
So what does he suggest?
Two main strategies. First, and he thinks best, is for the ruler to actually go and live there.
Boots on the ground.
Exactly. Being present lets you tackle problems quickly, keeps local officials in check, and builds some connection. His example is the Turk in Greece, direct rule.
Makes sense. Direct oversight. What's the second option?
Establishing colonies.
Colonies. How does that work? Seems like it might cause resentment.
Well, his logic is interesting. He argues it's cheaper and actually less offensive than stationing big armies, garrisons.
Less offensive. How?
Because colonies only really hurt a few people, the ones whose land you take. And those people are scattered and poor, so they can't do much. The rest of the population isn't directly burdened.
Unlike garrisons, which everyone feels the cost of and sees the soldiers around.
Right. Garrisons breed widespread resentment. Colonies create localized, manageable discontent. It leads to that very stark line of his.
Oh, yeah. Men must either be caressed or else annihilated. Chilling.
It's blunt, certainly. It reflects that pragmatic, sometimes brutal assessment of political reality.
So, beyond managing the internal situation, what about dealing with neighbors, if you're the new ruler in town?
His advice is pretty strategic. You need to become the leader and protector of the weaker states around you.
Okay.
And at the same time, actively work to weaken the stronger ones nearby.
Why? What's the goal there?
The goal is to stop any other powerful force from getting involved, from potentially helping anyone unhappy inside your new territory.
No.
You create a buffer zone, essentially.
Like the Romans did in their provinces, he says.
Exactly. He holds them up as a model for this kind of regional power management.
And he warns against waiting too long to deal with problems, right? The fever analogy.
Yes, that's crucial. He compares brewing political troubles to hectic fevers easy to cure early on, but deadly if you ignore them. The Romans, he argues, dealt with Philip and Antiochus proactively, fought wars far away rather than wait for trouble to arrive at their doorstep.
Unlike just, hoping time will sort things out.
He thinks relying on the benefits of time is often a mistake. Delay works against you. And he uses King Louis XII of France and Italy as a prime example of what not to do.
Oh, right. Louis seems to get everything wrong, according to Machiavelli. What were his big mistakes?
It's quite a list. He crushed the smaller Italian powers instead of protecting them. He made the Pope stronger. He brought in another major foreign power, Spain.
Didn't live there, didn't set up colonies.
Correct on all counts. And then he attacked Venice, weakening a potential ally. Each move, Machiavelli argues, undermined Louis's own position.
Leading to that general rule.
Whoever is the cause of another becoming powerful is ruined himself.
Yeah.
A really stark warning about unintended consequences.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. He also talks about governing different types of states internally, like the difference between Turkey and France in his day.
Right. He contrasts states governed by a prince and his appointed servants like the Ottoman Sultan, where everyone owes their position to him, versus states like France, ruled by a prince and powerful hereditary barons.
And that structure makes a big difference to the prince's actual authority.
Huge difference. In the Turkish model, the prince's authority is much more absolute. In the French model, the barons have their own power bases, their own loyalties.
Which affects how easy they are to conquer or hold.
Exactly. Machiavelli argues it might be easier to get into a place like France because you could maybe bribe or win over some unhappy baron.
Find a way in.
Right. But holding it is much harder because you can never fully satisfy or eliminate all those independent nobles.
Whereas the Ottoman model...
Harder to conquer initially, perhaps, but once you defeat the ruler and eliminate his family, it's easier to hold because there are no other major power centers left. The Romans found this out, he says, comparing their experiences in places like Spain and France versus Greece.
That internal structure is really fundamental then. What about cities that were used to being free, having their own laws? That seems like a special challenge.
It absolutely is. He lays out 3 options for a ruler who takes over such a city.
Okay, what are they?
1. Ruin them completely. 2. Go and live there yourself. 3. Let them keep their laws, but set up a friendly government inside and charge them tribute.
But he doesn't rate all those equally, does he?
No. He's brutally direct. The only truly sure way to hold them, he says, is destruction.
Wow. Ruin them. Why so extreme?
Because, in his view, a city that remembers freedom will never truly forget it. The name of liberty, the old ways. They're always there, ready to spark a rebellion no matter how well you treat them.
He mentions the Spartans losing Athens and Thebes because they tried a later touch.
Exactly. And the Romans, who ultimately had to dismantle places like Capua and Carthage to secure their rule. Free cities just don't adapt easily to being ruled by a prince, unlike cities already used to it.
It's a stark point about the power of memory and identity. Okay, let's talk about ability versus fortune. How much is down to the ruler's skill and how much is just luck?
This is absolutely central to his thinking. He sees that new rulers often try to copy great leaders from the past.
Makes sense. Learn from the best.
Right. But he uses this great analogy of archers aiming higher than their target. You might not hit the exact mark of the great leader, but aiming high gets you closer than aiming low. The key, though, is adapting those methods wisely.
And he clearly prefers rulers who rise by their own steam through their own abilities.
Oh, definitely. He admires figures like Moses, Cyrus, Romulus, Theseus. Even Jerome of Syracuse, who started as a private citizen. He argues that while fortune might give them an opportunity,
it was their ability that let them seize it and build something lasting.
Precisely. And the path is different, isn't it? Those who rise by ability often face a tougher time initially. They have to create new systems, overcome resistance.
More difficult to get started.
Yes. But once they're established, their rule is usually more secure. It's built on their own strength, their own foundations.
Compared to those who get power through fortune, like inheritance or someone else's help.
Their rise might be easy, almost effortless sometimes. But holding on to power, that's much harder. They depend on others, on luck, things they can't control. They haven't necessarily built the skills or the support base needed.
Key contrast, Francesco Sforza's ability held Milan securely with Cesare Borgia.
Right. Borgia is fascinating. He gained power largely through his father, the Pope. Fortune gave him his start.
But Machiavelli still holds him up as a kind of model, doesn't he? Even though he failed in the end.
He does, specifically as a model for those who rise through fortune in the arms of others, because Borgia did almost everything right strategically given his circumstances.
What sort of things?
Well, weakening his rivals, winning over their followers, using calculated cruelty to pacify regions like the Romagna, then installing good government. He was ruthless, but also effective in trying to build his own independent power base.
So what went wrong?
Bad luck, ultimately. His father died too soon, and he himself got seriously ill at a crucial moment. But Machiavelli also points to one major mistake Borgia made, allowing Julius II to become pope. Julius was an old enemy of his family, and that decision directly led to Borgia's downfall. It shows how even smart moves can be undone if your power relies too much on external factors you can't control.
A precarious position. Now, Machiavelli doesn't shy away from the darker paths to power, does he? Getting there through outright villainy.
No, he confronts it directly. He talks about Agathorgles in Sicily, Oliverado de Fermo, men who seized power through brutal treachery and violence.
And what's his assessment? Can you succeed that way?
You can gain an empire, he says, but not glory. He acknowledges Agathocles' skill and courage, but says his savagery means he can't be counted among the truly great. Oliverado's story is even shorter betrayal, brief power, violent death.
So just getting power isn't enough for Machiavelli. There's a difference between ruling and being, well, truly esteemed.
Yes, and this leads into his concept of cruelties well used versus ill used, which sounds calculating.
It does sound calculating. What does he mean by well used?
Well-used cruelties are those done decisively, all at once, right at the beginning, when you take power. You do what you have to do to secure your position, eliminate threats, and then you stop.
And then shift to benefiting the people.
Exactly. The shock establishes control, then you try to win goodwill. Ill-used cruelties are the opposite. They start small and grow over time, keeping people in constant fear and resentment.
So get the nasty business done quickly and then focus on stability and maybe even popularity.
That seems to be the idea. It's pragmatic if morally uncomfortable.
Definitely. Then he talks about a different route, the civic principality, gaining power with the help of your fellow citizens.
Right, this isn't through force or inheritance, but through popular or aristocratic favor. It requires, he says, a kind of fortunate astuteness.
And it involves navigating that inherent tension between the nobles and the common people.
Yes, he sees that as fundamental. The people just want not to be oppressed. The nobles want to oppress. They have conflicting desires.
So if a prince comes to power because the nobles backed him, what's the crucial advice?
He absolutely has to win over the people, even if the nobles helped him rise. The people are a much broader, more reliable base of support, especially when things get tough.
Because the nobles might have their own agendas.
Exactly. And he adds that if you can win over people who initially expected bad treatment, they can become very loyal. The key is making sure your people always feel they need you.
That makes sense. Okay, how does he suggest a prince should measure the actual strength of his state? Is it just about army size?
Not entirely. He makes a distinction. There are princes who can stand alone, field their own army, defend themselves without help.
And then there are those who can't, who need allies or defenses.
Right. And for those princes, the priority becomes fortifying their main city really well, stocking it with supplies, ensuring the fortifications are strong.
Like the German cities he mentions.
Yes, he admired their self-sufficiency, their strong walls, their preparedness. The idea is, don't worry too much about the surrounding countryside if you can't defend it anyway. Focus on making your city impregnable.
And crucially, don't be hated by your people inside those walls.
That's the other key piece. A strong city, well-provisioned, with a populace that doesn't hate the ruler. That's a very tough nut for an enemy to crack. The logistics of a siege are hard, and a united population makes it even harder.
It's a deterrent. Now, he mentions ecclesiastical principalities, church-states, almost as a separate category. Why?
Because they operate differently. They might be acquired like other states through skill or luck, but they're maintained by something else, ancient religious customs and the authority of the church itself.
So the rules are different for them.
Pretty much. He observes they have states without really defending them in a military sense and subjects without really governing them day to day, yet they remain secure. He almost throws up his hand and says their power comes from God, so it's beyond human understanding to fully analyze.
Though he does briefly touch on how the church did gain temporal power in Italy, mentioning popes like Alexander VI and Julius II using money and force.
Yes, he acknowledges that historical process, how the papacy went from being relatively weak politically to a major player in Italy, using figures like Caesar Borgia even. But the ongoing security he attributes to something more than just politics or military might.
Interesting exception. Let's get back to a core element for any state,
Hmm?
the military. Machiavelli has strong opinions here.
Very strong. He basically says the two main foundations of a state are good laws and good arms. And you can't really have good laws without good arms to back them up.
Okay, and he breaks down armies into different types.
Yes, your own troops, mercenaries, auxiliaries borrowed from allies, and mixed forces.
And he's not a fan of mercenaries or auxiliaries, is he?
Not at all. He calls them useless and dangerous. Mercenaries, he argues, fight only for pay. They have no real loyalty, no courage. When things get truly dangerous, they're undisciplined. He blames Italy's reliance on them for many of its problems.
Because their only motivation is cash, not defending the state itself.
Exactly. And auxiliaries troops loaned by another ruler are just as bad, maybe worse.
How so?
If they lose, well, you're defeated. But if they win, you're essentially in their debt, maybe even their prisoner. You've invited a foreign power in. He points to Pope Julius using Spanish troops as a risky move.
So, if hired guns and borrowed armies are bad news, what's the solution?
Your own forces. An army made up of your citizens or subjects. That is the only reliable foundation.
Like Rome, Sparta, the Swiss?
Those are his examples. States with their own arms are much harder to subjugate. Even a mixed army, some of your own, some mercenaries, is better than purely relying on outsiders, but still not as good as a fully national force.
And the reason boils down to loyalty.
Loyalty and motivation. Your own people are fighting for their homes, their families, their own state. Their commitment runs deeper than a paycheck. Victory won with foreign arms, he says, isn't true victory.
Okay, so having your own army is crucial. What else does a prince need to do regarding the military? Is it just about having soldiers?
No, it needs to be the prince's primary focus. His main thought, his main study should be war, its organization, its discipline. He sees this military skill as the one essential art for anyone who rules or wants to keep ruling.
More important than anything else.
He argues that neglecting military affairs for, say, luxury and comfort is the surest way to lose your state. And being skilled in war earns you the respect of your soldiers, which is vital.
How should a prince develop this skill, especially when there isn't a war going on?
Two ways: action and study. Action means things like hunting not just for fun, but to toughen the body and, crucially, to learn the landscape of your own territory. Understand the terrain where armies can move, where defenses can be set up.
Practical knowledge and study.
Reading history. Studying the campaigns of great commanders, Alexander, Caesar, Cyrus. Analyzing their successes and failures. Learning from their strategies. Constantly thinking about military problems.
So it's a continuous process, this military education.
Absolutely. It's not something you delegate entirely. Now, this brings us to maybe the most famous or infamous part of The Prince, the qualities rulers are praised or blamed for.
Right. This is where the Machiavellian reputation really takes hold. He starts by saying, okay, lots of people have written about how princes should be.
But he's interested in how things actually are. He argues that to survive, a prince must learn how not to be good when necessary.
Meaning?
Meaning, if you try to be perfectly virtuous all the time in a world where others aren't, you'll probably be ruined. The goal isn't perfect goodness, it's preserving the state. And the most important things to avoid are being hated and being despised.
So sometimes actions that seem bad might be necessary for survival. He looks at specific qualities then, like generosity versus being stingy.
Yes, being seen as generous is nice, obviously.
Yeah.
But if you try to be too generous, you'll run out of money, have to tax people heavily, and end up being hated anyway for being rapacious.
So being stingy is better.
He argues it's wiser to accept the reputation of being a miser, which brings disgrace, but not necessarily hatred, than to pursue generosity to the point where you become predatory and earn both disgrace and hatred.
A calculated reputational risk. What about cruelty versus mercy? And that classic question, loved or feared?
Ideally, he says, you want to be both loved and feared.
Hmm.
But that's hard to achieve.
So if you have to choose?
It's safer to be feared than loved.
Why?
Because love, he argues, is fickle. It depends on obligation, which people break whenever it suits them. Fear, however, is maintained by a dread of punishment, which is much more reliable.
But he adds a crucial caveat, right? Fear, yes, but not hatred.
Absolutely critical. Avoid seizing property, avoid messing with the honor of women, actions that turn fear into burning resentment. He also says cruelty might be necessary sometimes, like Cesar Borgia pacifying the Romagna, arguing that a few necessary cruelties can be more merciful in the long run than allowing disorder to reign, which hurts everyone. And for army leaders, cruelty might even be essential for discipline, like Hannibal.
Okay, this leads straight into keeping your promises. Honesty is good.
Laudable, yes,
Oh.
but experience shows, he says, that the princes who've done great things often played fast and loose with their word. They understood the value of cunning.
The lion and the fox analogy comes in here.
Exactly. You need to be strong like the lion to fend off wolves, but clever like the fox to recognize traps. A wise ruler, he argues, shouldn't keep faith when it goes against his interests or when the reasons he made the promise are gone, especially since other people aren't always trustworthy either.
That sounds pretty cynical.
It is pragmatic. However, he also stresses the immense importance of appearing to have all the good qualities: mercy, faith, integrity, humanity, religion. People are judged by appearances.
So look good even if you have to act differently sometimes.
Essentially, in the actions of princes, he concludes, the end justifies the means. The masses look at the results. If you win and maintain your state, you'll generally be praised.
Okay, let's circle back to avoiding being despised and hated. We know avoiding taking property and women is key for hatred. What leads to being despised?
Being seen as fickle, frivolous, effeminate, cowardly, or indecisive. Weakness, basically. A prince needs to project the opposite. Grandeur, courage, seriousness, strength. Make decisions and stick to them.
And a strong reputation helps protect you.
Definitely. It makes conspiracies harder. People respect and fear a strong leader. He talks about the two main fears, from your subjects internal and from foreign powers, external. Good armies and allies help with the external. Avoiding hatred and contempt helps with the internal.
He uses that Bologna example of Bentivogli showing how popular support can save you.
Yes, the power of goodwill. He also analyzes Roman emperors, showing how many fell precisely because they couldn't manage the conflicting demands of the soldiers and the people, leading to hatred or contempt from one group or the other. It was often their downfall.
Fascinating. What about physical defenses, like fortresses? Are they the answer?
He's actually quite nuanced about fortresses. He notes that historically they've been used, but questions their ultimate value.
Why? Don't strong walls help?
They can, but he argues a new prince is usually better off arming his subjects, not disarming them. Armed subjects become your partisans. Disarming them breeds distrust. Unless it's a newly added territory to an old state, that might be different.
And build in lots of forts.
He points out that some rulers used fortresses, others tore them down. He also questions the wisdom of deliberately fostering factions within cities to control them, saying divided cities just fall easily to enemies. His final take.
Yes.
Fortresses can be useful sometimes, but the best fortress, the most reliable defense, is not being hated by your own people. If the people hate you, no fortress will save you in the long run. He mentions the Countess of Forli holding her fortress, but only because the people didn't rise against her initially.
So popular support trumps stone walls. How does a prince actively build that support and reputation, that esteem?
Through great undertakings, grand enterprises, actions that make people sit up and take notice. He uses Ferdinand of Aragon, the King of Spain, as a contemporary example of someone who achieved amazing things and gained huge renown.
Big achievements. What else?
Taking clear sides in conflicts. Don't be neutral, he advises. Neutrality often leaves you vulnerable to both winner and loser. Pick a side, preferably the winning one. But be wary of allying with someone much stronger than you, unless you absolutely have to. You might become their dependent.
Like Venice getting tangled up with France against Milan.
Exactly, a cautionary tale. He also mentions showing greatness in internal affairs, rewarding or punishing in ways that get talked about, and engaging with the public festivals, spectacles, meeting with guilds and groups showing humanity, but always maintaining dignity.
It's a constant performance in a way. Now, what about the team around the prince? His ministers, his secretaries?
Hugely important. Choosing good ministers is the first sign of a prince's own intelligence, he says.
How do you pick them? How do you know if they're any good?
He offers a simple test. Does the minister think more of his own benefit than yours? If he's always looking out for number one, he's not reliable. A good minister prioritizes the prince and the state.
And once you find good ones, how do you keep them loyal?
Treat them well. Honor them, enrich them, bind them to you so they share in your success and fear your failure. Make it so they depend on you and have too much to lose if things change.
Makes sense. What about the opposite problem, flatterers? Courts are full of
Oh,
this.
huge danger, he agrees. It's hard to avoid because people naturally like praise, but flattery clouds judgment.
So how do you get honest advice without offending people or making them afraid to speak?
His solution is careful selection. Choose a few wise counselors and give them and only them the liberty to tell you the truth, but only about things you ask them about.
So controlled truth-telling.
Right. The prince should ask questions often, listen patiently, but make his own decisions. And he should get annoyed if he thinks people are not telling him the truth. Ultimately, he argues, good counsel doesn't make a prince wise. A wise prince will naturally seek out and recognize good counsel.
Okay, as we near the end of the book, Machiavelli turns his focus squarely on Italy. Why, in his view, have the Italian princes of his time been losing their states?
He's quite critical. He says it's not primarily bad luck or fortune. It's their own negligence, their own ignavia, lack of skill or energy.
What did they do wrong?
They failed to prepare during peacetime. They enjoyed the good times and didn't think about potential storms ahead. Then, when trouble hit, they ran away, hoping their subjects would eventually call them back out of disgust with the conquerors.
Instead of building their own defenses.
Exactly. Instead of relying on their own ability, their own forces,
Right.
he concludes that the only defenses that are truly good, certain, and durable are the ones based on your own virtue and resources. Self-reliance again.
Which leads into his final thoughts on fortune, fortuna. How much control do we really have?
He tackles this head on. He knows many people believe everything is governed by fortune and God, that we can't really change things.
A fatalistic view.
Yes. But Machiavelli doesn't fully accept it. He offers that famous analogy. Fortune is like a raging river. When it's flooding, it's destructive, unstoppable.
Okay.
But during calm times, you can build dams, canals, defenses to manage the river, to channel its force when it rises again.
So we can prepare. We have some agency.
That's his argument. Maybe fortune controls half of our actions, he suggests, but she leaves the other half, or something close to it, for us to control through our free will and foresight. Fortune shows her power where there's no organized resistance ready for her.
And Italy, in his time, lacked those defenses.
Exactly. It was a campaign without banks and without defenses. He also explores why princes might succeed for a while, then suddenly fail, even if their character hasn't changed.
Why is that?
It depends on whether their way of operating aligns with the quality of the times. Sometimes caution is needed, sometimes boldness. People achieve goals through different methods.
But it's hard to change your nature, isn't it?
Very hard. A cautious man struggles when impetuosity is required, and vice versa. That's why rulers often fall when the times change. They can't adapt their approach. He uses Pope Julius II again. His bold, impetuous nature suited the times, leading to success where caution might have failed.
So what's the bottom line on dealing with fortune?
His final thought is quite striking. Success comes when your methods match the times. But since times change, and it's hard to change yourself, it's probably better to be impetuous than cautious.
Why?
Because, he says famously, fortune is a woman. And like a woman, she yields more readily to the bold, the adventurous, the young, those who treat her roughly, rather than the cold and calculating.
A very provocative image, and he ends the whole book with a direct appeal, right? An exhortation to liberate Italy.
Yes, a really passionate call to action. He argues that the current moment, Italy being divided, oppressed, more enslaved than the Hebrews, more servile than the Persians, more scattered than the Athenians, is actually the perfect opportunity for a great leader, a new prince, to rise up.
Like Moses, Cyrus, Theseus, finding opportunity in crisis.
Exactly. He sees the potential for redemption, for someone, likely hinting at the Medici to whom the book is dedicated, to unite and liberate Italy from foreign domination, the barbarians. He sees it as a just cause, maybe even divinely favored.
He knows past attempts failed.
But he blames outdated military methods and lack of unified, innovative leadership. He stresses yet again the need for the liberator to create his own army, loyal Italian troops, as the only true foundation. He even suggests tactics for a new kind of Italian infantry that could beat the Swiss and Spanish.
It's a powerful vision he paints.
It really is. He imagines the reception such a liberator would receive, what doors would be closed to him, what people would deny him obedience, what envy would oppose him, what Italian would withhold his allegiance. It's full of hope and patriotic fire, ending with lines from Petrarch about ancient valor returning.
So, wrapping up our deep dive here, The Prince is clearly much more complex than just a guide to being ruthless. What are the big takeaways for you?
I think it's that Machiavelli offers this incredibly clear-eyed, pragmatic look at how power really works. Not how we wish it worked, but how it functions in the messy reality of human affairs. He forces you to think about the hard choices involved in leadership, the importance of stability, the necessity of understanding military power, and that difficult balance between appearing virtuous and acting effectively.
It's about moving past simple idealism and confronting the practicalities, even the uncomfortable ones, of governing and surviving.
Exactly. And remember, his goal arguably wasn't tyranny for its own sake, but finding a way to create a stable, unified, and ultimately well-governed state,